Thank you, Professor Sharma, for your fascinating and very thought-provoking account of crisis situations that governments and policymakers around the world are grappling with. Now, I would like to take the honor of requesting Wilfried Swenden, Professor of South Asian and Comparative Politics at University of Edinburgh, to deliver his introductory remarks. Professor Swenden has worked extensively on multi-level governance and federalism in Western Europe and Australia. Since 2011, South Asian politics has been his main geographical focus of research. Professor Swenden. Yeah.
Thank you very much for these very kind introductory words. Before I say a few introductory remarks, I want to express my gratitude to Chanchal in particular, but also to the Hanns-Seidel Foundation, to the Forum of Federations, and to Mahesh in doing a lot of the important groundwork, organizational work that went into preparing this event. Although I'm an advisor, I can say that 99% of the work really has been done by Chanchal and his local team. So thank you so much for all your efforts. I want to say a few things about the theme of federalism. So one of the key objectives of this conference is actually to find out how federal responses have, or how responses have emerged to crisis in federal countries. And although it is not the only crisis on which we focus, a lot of the papers actually focus on the pandemic and how India and other federal states responded to this. And as Chanchal was already alluding to, federalism here presents both a challenge and an opportunity. It's a challenge because in emergencies, it's quite clear that there is a strong need for coordination on what is the most appropriate response, health response, social policy response to a crisis of this magnitude. But it's also an opportunity because one does realize that actually federal states are at an advantage to the extent that they offer the institutional architecture that enables actually locally tailored responses that respond to the local needs, which may vary from one state to another, or indeed which may vary from one municipality to another. And so we see nonetheless that faced with this challenge and opportunity, the federal countries of the world have provided quite different responses. And it is quite difficult to provide a kind of uniform response in which we set off federal states against unitary states. And that's partially because there are so many different types of federations. There are federations that are relatively small, large. There are federations that are comparatively centralized, others that are decentralized. Some are presidential, others are parliamentary. Some are multinational, others are more mononational. So all of these kind of different shapes in which federalism comes. Some of them, I should add, have a kind of role distribution where a lot of the legislation is done centrally and the states or lower levels play a very important role in implementation, whereas others actually disentangle these two responsibilities more between two levels. So based on all these varieties of federalism, we also have seen a variety of responses in terms of how these states managed the pandemic. I think if we look a little bit at India, it's quite interesting to look at how some of the responses may have been shaped by what one might refer to as antecedent conditions, kind of policy legacies that were there. If we think about states like Kerala and Odisha, for instance, they had to deal with emergencies in the context of flooding, the Nipah virus, cyclones. And so in some sense, they were already equipped to provide a response which may not have been there to the same extent in other states of the Federation. But in the case of Kerala, we also have evidence of persistent, over a very long period of time, disproportionately large investment in welfare and health in comparison, or health infrastructure, and a tradition of strong decentralization, which is not necessarily there to the same extent in the other states of the Indian Federation. A few of the other themes that we can touch upon in the context of this conference, and also Chanchal was alluding to it, are thinking about the long-term implications of crisis on the balance of power between the federation, the states, and local entities in a federation. We know that economic crises such as the New Deal at the time and the response it generated in the US may have long-term implications for the distribution of authority within the federation. So it remains to be seen what the long-term implication will be of the pandemic, for instance, on the role of the center in the provision of health or other forms of social policy, which may not have been there prior to the pandemic. There are interesting papers that also look at the role of political leadership, the role of judicial federalism as a safeguard of federalism in a context where the political response might drive towards a more unitary nature, and of course also papers that discuss the patterns of intergovernmental relations, so where coordination is required between several levels or even between several governments of the same level, states, it is important to look at the mechanisms of IGR, and the responses in that regard can sometimes be surprising. I'm originally from Belgium, which is a multinational federation, but there actually the deliberation committee, which brings together the federal government and the state governments, developed an unexpected important role in handling and coordinating on the pandemic. To the extent that in India, bodies such as the Interstate Council, which are constitutionally equipped potentially to deal with issues as this, actually did not develop into the same kind of a cooperative model. So why is that, and why are these responses different across different federal contexts, even though one might say several of these states may be multinational in character? So this is in a nutshell some of the questions I think that we will touch upon during the next few days. Again, thank you so much for participating in this event, and in particular thanks to the main organizer and the sponsors in making it possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Swenden, for your extremely valuable insights that deepen our practical understanding of the role of the federal system in times of crisis. Our next speaker is Dr. Elizabeth Alber, Senior Researcher at the Institute for Comparative Federalism at Eurac Research in Bolzano, Italy.